Michael Faulkender. He's former Assistant Treasury Secretary for Economic Policy, Chief Economist at AFPI, and Economics Professor at the University of Maryland. Great to see you again, Michael. I'm just going to read to you the headline from the Wall Street Journal piece, Nick Timiraos, who's pretty good. He says, quote, Fed Chair notes that economy hasn't cooled as expected, which leads me to ask, what was he expecting? I mean, are they trying to get a recession or what?
They very much are, because the Fed, both the chairman as well as the staff underneath them, are still bought into this Keynesian idea that the only way to bring down prices is to slow down the economy, that in order to bring inflation back to the target 2%, it's almost as if he's trying to put it into a recession, because they view economic growth and price stability as in conflict with each other. Whereas, David, as we've talked about before, if instead what we had is a pro-supply side type of economic approach, where we actually encouraged businesses to come in and bring additional supply online, we'd have that boost in quantity supplied that brings prices down, rather than thinking the only way to bring prices back to a 2% inflation level is by continuing to suppress demand.
Well, and again, we've been here before. I mean, in the late 1970s, you're too young to remember. I still remember. In the late 70s, we had this limits to growth group because we'd been through years of stagflation. They said, shut up and get used to it, Americans, because this is the way from now on. You're going to have low growth, you still have a little bit of inflation, and you're going to have to live with less, is basically what it was. Reagan said, no, I don't buy into that. I think you can have lower inflation and more supply side inventions and more supply side information that will lead to incredible growth of the economy, and that will take care of inflation itself. It worked. It actually worked. We brought inflation down, had spectacular growth for 7 years. Why doesn't Powell buy into that?
Well, that's exactly right, David. And it wasn't just that we saw it under Reagan, but we saw it under President Trump as well. We were able to get, even though we were on the tail end of the longest economic expansion on record, we saw growth go up in the 2018 and 2019 time period after we put in place pro-growth tax reform and a regulatory policy that encouraged energy independence, if not energy abundance, here in the United States. But it seems as if this administration is more focused on curtailing American energy and their green agenda. And Jerome Powell, I don't know if it was just in order to get renominated or if he's really bought on to the Biden administration's approach to these things, but he's very much enabling this view that only the Fed can curtail inflation, when in fact it must be a coordinated approach. And so the other model I would point to is both Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan, who by now would have gone to Congress and to the administration and said, stop relying solely on monetary policy. We need tax policy, spending policy, and regulatory reform to be joining in our objective of bringing prices down. Because the American people know that the inflation was not caused just by bad monetary policy, it was caused by excessive spending. And so unless and until we get the spending under control and we go back to pro-growth regulatory policy, unfortunately, Chairman Powell is going to be having great difficulty getting back to that 2% target.
Well, to the maybe not the credit, but to defend a little bit Powell, he can't do that. He can't create those incentives that Congress could create. He can't lower the spending that Congress is in charge of and that the president working with Congress would be able to do. So you're suggesting at the very least he could point his finger at him and say, look, I can't do it just by myself. You have to do it on the supply side.
That's right. If you go back and look at examples in history, Alan Greenspan and Paul Volcker, there were occasions where they told Congress that they needed help, that monetary policy alone could not do it, that we needed a coordination between fiscal policy, regulatory policy, and monetary policy if we really were going to realize American abundance and that growth without inflation that we were talking about before. So yes, Powell can't do it alone, but Powell can, through his bully pulpit, tell the Congress and tell the administration that he needs their help, rather than conveying to the American people that it's his responsibility alone.
You know, the other thing that's a little disappointing is the Republicans in the House. I don't see them doing as much as they could do in terms of pushing incentivized tax programs, for example. Even if it's not going to pass in the Senate, you could at least do something a little more powerfully incentivizing than what they have been coming up with, no?
Well, we've seen some attempts. So Chairman Smith in House Ways and Means has a pretty good package that extends some of the pro-growth components of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that are expiring. Unfortunately, what he's confronting is that there's a small subset of Republican congressmen who are wedded to eliminating the SALT deduction and are holding hostage some of that pro-growth tax reform. So that's the problem we've got going there. But I do applaud the House for H.R. 1, their pro-energy, pro-growth, pro-U.S. energy bill that they put forward, and it would be great to see if Chuck Schumer and the president would get on board with energy reform.
All right, Michael Faulkender, great to see you again. Thanks for being here, Michael. Appreciate it.